Hello, in this video we're going to look at while loops in Java. So looping is where we really start to leverage the power of programming to change what would otherwise be extremely repetitive or even impossibly repetitive tasks into something we can just get the computer to do automatically. So what I'll do here, since I'm using Eclipse and since I don't want to see all these projects, I've created a new project called While Loops for this video. I'm just going to click this little down arrow by the Package Explorer, go to Select Working Set. I'm going to select Projects 2, which doesn't have any projects in it at the moment. This is what I created in the last video. Click Edit, and I'm going to say that I want while loops in this working set. Click Add for that, click Finish. And I just want to see the Projects 2 working set. So I click OK. And there we go, that's cleared things up a lot. Okay, so I've got a blank project here and I'm going to output some text. So sysout control space and hello. And let's run this project. So it just says hello, nothing spectacular there. Now, a while loop looks like this. So I use a Java keyword, a reserved word. So it's a special word in the Java language, and there aren't all that many reserved words in the Java language, but this is one of them. And we can already see some others, for example, public and class and package. So let's type while. And next we've got two round brackets like this. And then we've got an opening curly bracket on the same line. It's on the same line because of the code formatting convention that I'm using. You could be using a different one, but I wouldn't recommend it. And then we hit return, and Eclipse has actually put in the closing curly bracket for me. Now what's this going to do? Well, we're going to put stuff between these curly brackets. So in this code block, between these two curly brackets, we're going to put statements that we want to run repeatedly over and over again. And we have to have some way of saying how many times we're going to run them repeatedly. And in this case, what I'm going to do is something that you don't usually do in a computer program, but we're just learning here, so it's fine. I'm going to make it run forever, or rather until we stop the program. And to do that, I'm going to say while, and in the round brackets, I'm going to put true. What's true? Well, it's that's a good question. You know what? We'll tackle that in a future video. But we have a primitive type in Java called Boolean, and it can take the values true and false. So, like an integer can take the values, can take whole number values. Boolean, the Boolean types of variables can take these values true or false, just one of these two values. And here we're using true. So that's saying while true is true, in other words, keep looping. And the value true is always true, so it will loop forever. Don't worry too much about this. If this sounds baffling, I'm almost managing to confuse myself. Don't worry about it for the moment. But we'll be looking at much more sophisticated while loops later on. For some reason I've got an aeroplane going past. It always happens when I make videos. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select this systemout.println hello, and I'm going to just cut it. So Control X or Command X on the Mac. And I'm going to paste it between these curly brackets. That didn't go so well. Let me try again. There we go. And just to make sure the formatting's okay, I'm going to run the auto format. Control Shift F. Okay, that removed a few blank lines. So we're saying while true is true, in other words, while forever, output hello. And if we run this little program now, then it outputs hello over and over again. It's going to keep doing that till I stop it, and probably my computer fan will start going pretty quickly because it's going to be using up too much processing power. I'm going to stop it by clicking this red button in the console. That stops your programs. So it's now stopped. And I don't know if you can hear it, but my computer fan is kicking in. So it's not good to let these programs run for too long. Better if you just look for the sort of grayed out run terminate button in the console there, and run it and then quickly stop it again. I'm not actually sure if this can be stopped. If I click in the console, no, I do Control C. In a normal console, typically Control C might stop that program, but here it's doing nothing. So I'm just going to use the terminate button. Okay, so try that out for yourself. Try creating this little program, and before you run it, so you don't end up having to forcibly quit Eclipse or something, make sure you can see this it's grayed out at the moment, terminate button in the console. And then when you start seeing hello being output, hit that terminate button, because you don't want this to overheat your computer. Okay, try that out for yourself and verify it works, and we'll be looking at some more stuff relevant to this in the next video. Okay, so until next time, happy coding. Hello, in this video we're going to take a look at how to terminate our while loops from our program. So in the last video we saw an example of a non-terminating while loop, so a loop that just keeps going forever, an infinite loop. In this video we're going to make it actually terminate. So let's start by, here I've got a new project which I've called loop conditions, and I'm going to recreate a while loop. So it's worth typing this a few times yourself so you get into the swing of typing it. Let's write while true, open a curly bracket, and then make sure the curly bracket's closed. And let's output a system.out.println hello. I'd strongly recommend typing this out several times because it will really help you. You've got to sort of memorize these constructs, but not by just looking at them and thinking, but rather than by typing them a few times. That really helps. Okay, so what we'll do here is above the while loop, and it's really important that we do this above the while loop, I'm going to declare an integer variable. I'm going to call it int counter, and I'll set it equal to 0 to start with. Let's output the counter in our system.out.println. In fact, let's write in here, well, let's use printf just for some practice using it. So here, instead of hello, I'm going to write counter colon just for some text, and then I'm going to put %d, and then let's finish it with a \n to create a new line after each time this runs. So that the first argument is this string with a format specifier in it, %d, and after that I'm going to write comma counter. Alright, so if we run that as it is, we're just going to see 0 printed over and over again. So let's look. Terminate it with the red button there. So it just says counter 0. But now within the loop, I'm going to go underneath where I wrote system.out.printf, and I'm going to say counter, and I'm going to assign a new value to counter. So I want to use the assignment operator. And the new value is going to be the original value, counter, plus 1. So now, every time the loop goes round, it'll give this new value to counter, and the new value will be the original value with 1 added to it. And that's going to mean that the counter is going to increase 1 by 1. Let's run it. And we can see we've now got huge values very quickly being output here. You might have a low value if your computer's a bit slower. If you've got an even faster computer than me, you're going to get more numbers being output there, probably. All right. We can use this to terminate our loop. And by the way, this is not the only way we can do this, but for the moment we'll leave it at this because it's already quite puzzling by itself. It's not an equation, remember. We're literally saying, okay, take this value. So it's best really in a way to read it from right to left. So we're saying take counter, whatever the value is, add 1 to it, and then we're going to assign that value back to the variable counter. So if counter is 0, we add 1 and we get 1, and then we assign the value 1. Whoa, didn't mean to do that. We're going to assign the value 1 to the variable counter, so counter is now 1. That's why it's incrementing like that. That's why it's increasing. We can use that to terminate the loop if we change this to while counter less than 10. Alright, so this is a less than symbol, and what this is saying is do the loop while it's true that the value of counter is less than 10. Alright, so I'm going to make some more remarks about this in the next video, but for now just type this out, and even if it's puzzling now, it will gradually start to make sense. But typing is really, you know, it's almost like 90% of the challenge in a way, because you type these and you become familiar, and gradually, I suppose the thing is it's a lot easier to understand a program if it's already in your memory. If you already remember what the program looks like, it becomes a lot easier to understand it than if you're also struggling to remember what different bits it has. And when you type it out, that forces you to pay attention to every single character in the program, and that really helps. So you notice here we've got a semicolon. You could easily forget that, easily forget these semicolons, but by typing them over and over again, you just get used to putting them in. You remember that they're there. So typing programs and running them, it's really, really important. So now if we run this, we see in the console, we can actually make this console bigger if I drag it up. We've got counter 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we've got 10 iterations in total. So there's 1 to 9, but there's also 0. So we've looped 10 times. We carried on looping as long as the value of counter was less than 10. So when it was equal to 10, what happened was the program said, okay, while 10, because counter eventually equaled 10, is less than 10, do the loop. And it said, well, it's not true that 10 is less than 10, so I'm not going to run this. So when this is true, if while finds that this condition is true, so that the counter is less than 10, it will run what's ever in brackets once, and then it goes back to the beginning and checks the condition again. And if it's still true, it runs it again. Eventually here in this program, it's finding that this condition is not true, and then it just does nothing. Then your program carries on to the lines after the while loop. Don't puzzle about that too much. For now, the important thing is type this out and get it working. And if you want a little challenge, try to write a program that outputs, let's say, the word hello or whatever you like, exactly 5 times, no more and no less, exactly 5 times. You could also make it output some number, but you don't forget you're going to need this in order to stop the loop. To stop the loop, you need that, and you need that. And you also, another place that beginners often go wrong is they put this variable declaration and assignment to 0, that initial variable declaration, they put it inside the loop, so inside these curly brackets. And if you do that, counter will always be 0 and it will never stop running. You've got to have this outside the loop, you use it in this condition, and very important, you increment it, which means increase it basically within this block. And that's where your system.out is also going, or system.out.printf in this case. So try that for yourself, and then try to create a program that outputs some text exactly 5 times, just for an exercise. Okay, so until next time, happy coding. Hello, in this video I just want to go over this basic while loop a little bit more. So I'm going to even, I think, repeat a little bit of what I said in the last video, because this is really an important topic. Now, hopefully you've tried out this code. It's really important to do that. And hopefully you've tried the little exercise I gave you to make the loop execute exactly 5 times instead of 10 times in this case, or make it execute some particular number of times of your choosing. It is only with typing it repeatedly that you will gradually become familiar with it. And yes, we'll be explaining everything that happens here, and you'll gradually come to understand all the individual elements of it much better than you currently do. But even so, it's important to type these things out to sort of, that will really help you remember them. And effectively, you've got a sort of recipe here, so that if you want a loop that executes a certain number of times, you know what to type. And then you don't even necessarily have to understand it, but eventually, certainly you will. So as we've seen, we've got this while loop, and it's going to execute this code block repeatedly, or it might not execute it at all if the loop condition here is never true. This will never get executed, but typically we're going to execute it at least once and probably several times. That's the point of a loop. And after the while loop is finished running your code block, then whatever statements are below, it's going to carry on. Your program will carry on executing those. And we've seen that to actually terminate the loop, we start with a variable declaration and we assign a value to it, typically 0. And then usually what we do, or perhaps most often, is we say run this loop as long as that counter is less than some value. So if I were to put 5 here, this code block would execute exactly 5 times. And the reason is that, the counter starts off at 0, and then this would be true for the values 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Remember, we're incrementing the counter, increasing the value of it every time we go through the loop. When counter is equal to 5, it would stop. This is a little bit confusing because we're saying while counter is less than 5, and yet somehow the loop executes exactly 5 times. And the reason is that we start at 0. So it executes for the value 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Instead of, as you might expect, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's just a little bit confusing, but basically if you want a loop that executes, 63 times, you'd put 63 here. So it's pretty simple. It's really important to type out this, even a few times if you can be bothered. Try to type it from memory or by looking at the code as little as possible until you can actually write a loop yourself. That's a good thing to do if you feel like looking at it, doing it, I should say, because as I've mentioned, a lot of learning just occurs with sort of almost like muscle memory. Just by typing it again, you've got a little recipe here for how to execute a loop a certain number of times. And I know at this point, if you're new to programming, you're going to probably still feel a bit confused, quite possibly. If you don't, that's great, but it will be normal to still feel confused. We're going to be looking at all the different elements of this loop in more detail and in other contexts, so you'll become familiar with them. But even if you do feel confused, by sort of learning this as a little recipe, then you've got something you can use, and then you can improve your understanding of it as time goes by. Okay, so one important element of this is that we must increment, or in other words, increase the counter as we go through the loop. Otherwise this condition will never be false, and the loop will go on forever. We have to remember to increment it. Increment just means increase, usually by 1. And there's also decrement, which means decrease by 1, and we're going to be looking at those. In this case, so we've got this expression which, as I've noted previously, can confuse beginners because it looks a bit like a mathematical equation expressing equality. It looks like it's saying counter is equal to itself plus 1. That's not what it means at all. It's really important to realize that in Java and a number of other programming languages, a single equals sign doesn't express equality. It expresses assignment. It's the assignment operator. And with the assignment operator, it's typically best to look at the right-hand side first and work out what that is going to amount to. And then that's going to get assigned to whatever variable is on the left-hand side. So in this case, we take the variable of counter, whatever it happens to be at that moment, we add 1 to it, and then we assign it, or we store that value in this variable on the left-hand side, which also happens to be counter, but that doesn't cause any problems. So it's like we're taking the value of counter, adding 1 to it, but that doesn't actually change counter. This bit doesn't change counter. You're just using the value of counter and adding 1 to that, and that's kind of stored in the computer's memory temporarily. It's this assignment that actually takes that new value, counter plus 1, and then stores it back in counter. If you are still confused, don't worry, that's normal. Your confusion will gradually clear up. One thing I noticed was that there's with Eclipse, I've been using working sets, which I don't use that much, to be honest, but I thought it would make things less confusing here. When I create a new project, it doesn't seem to automatically add it to the working set. I think that's a little Eclipse bug. Maybe it won't happen in your version, because when I go to new Java project, there's an option there to add project to working sets, and the one that I'm using is selected by default. But even so, I'm finding that my project ends up invisible. To see it, I can click this little down arrow, go to Window Working Sets, and I see all projects. And if I don't do that, if I just stay on the working set I'm in, what I'm finding I have to do is click the down arrow, go to go to Edit Active Working Set, and then I can see the project I've created, and I can add it to my existing working set, the one I'm using at the moment, the active one. So you hopefully won't have that Eclipse bug, but if you do, if you're creating projects and they don't appear, click the down arrow and go to Edit Working Set and just add it with the Add button here. Okay, we'll leave it there for this video, and what we're going to do in the next video is look at various ways of incrementing variables, because it's such an important topic. We're going to be using it over and over again, and gradually I'm going to introduce you to things like operator precedence, but sort of bit by bit. This is a complicated topic, and pretty soon we're going to get on to looking at other fundamental building blocks of computer programs, like the if construct and other types of loop, this sort of thing. Okay, so until next time, happy coding.